Okay, so the third question that you get is a write an account question. It's always phrased like that, and these questions are always worth 8 marks, and for 8 marks I would spend about 10 minutes doing the question, so that's important. And what they're asking you to do is to describe in this case events, but importantly to explain the significance of those events. Okay, so it's asking you to describe how things happened, in this case in Korea, but also to explain the significance. In other words, what you're doing is you're basically explaining how something changed because of these events you're describing. Okay, so it's asking you to describe change, really. Now, the mark scheme effectively says you really need to focus on 2, they're called factors, but for our point of view is 2, in this case, events that happen to get good marks in this question. It's always this magic number 2 with an 8-mark question. Okay, right. Now, in this particular question, it's write an account of how events in Korea became an international crisis. So you need to be thinking to yourself, what do I know about Korea in 1950? That's really important. And how did those things make the Korean War a crisis on an international scale? Now, the things that I would write about, if it was me in Korea in 1950, the 2 really important things that happen are, 1, the US-led UN forces invade, and the second thing I would want to write about is the Chinese forces invade as well. I think those are the 2 really important things that happen in 1950 that make the Korean War an international crisis. Okay, those really make it much more tense than it was before. So let's think then about why that is the case. I'm not writing it out here, but I'm just going through my thought process and thinking about the kind of evidence I would use. So number 1, do you remember, hopefully, that it was in September 1950 that these forces land in, first of all, a place called Busan, and then in Incheon, and we maybe can remember that they drive the North Korean forces back by October, and in fact they go all the way back into North Korea. So they have enormous success. And obviously why does this mean it's an international tension? Well, there's a couple of things you could say there. 1, you've now got, the USA and others involved. That hasn't happened before. Plus, they are now fighting in North Korea, which is a communist country. So both of those reasons are good reasons why it becomes a much bigger crisis, aren't they? And the second factor is, well, China. And we know that the Chinese forces invade as a response to what they see as UN aggression. Okay? And why does that make it? So they send, or another bit of evidence I could use, they send about 200,000 men, and the fighting gets much, much worse and much more brutal. Okay? And now, why is that a much more tense situation? Why has it got worse? Well, now you've got you've got 2 superpowers, haven't you, at war with each other. You've got the USA and you've got China, both vast countries with large resources and big militaries. And potentially you've now got the danger of a world war, haven't you? Because of course China is supported by the USSR and the US has the UN, so really this has the potential to get much, much greater. And the only other thing I could do as a third thing is I could have some sort of summary at the end which just explains how it goes from a civil war to a near World War, and we could even mention, of course, our old friend MacArthur, who wants to use nuclear bombs, couldn't we? So it goes from being, you know, two sides, two halves of the Korean War Peninsula fighting each other, to being something in which you've got America, 16 other UN nations, plus China involved, plus the Soviet Union supplying weapons, etc. So it becomes a much more serious event, all in the space of that year. Okay, so hopefully we can see by doing that how you get events turning it into an international crisis. Paragraph 1. Paragraph 2. If you want to, paragraph 3. I would always recommend paragraphing like that, because the examiner knows you're going on to that magic